Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just getting everyone added in here. So glad to have you with us live. I'm just saying a little hi. As you come in, we're letting everyone in. If you could maybe just open up the chat box. Hopefully you're familiar with Zoom. If not, just move your mouse and you'll find it. And say hi, say where you're from. Maybe what city, state, or country. And we'll get started in just a minute here. So we're about to do the lab class. Oh, I see a few familiar faces, so nice to see you. Oh, we've got some people from all over. Yay, I saw Canada, I saw the Philippines, New Jersey, LA, Texas. Oh, this is fun. All right, so I'm Dr. Zachary. I'll introduce myself very briefly in a minute here. We also have Kelly helping out, so she'll be able to answer some questions as we go along, and I will do a live Q&A at the end. Now, this class, just so you know, it's called the lab class. The main point of this class is to sort of try to teach you the methods I use, and may any of them be helpful for you to borrow them, to know when you first see a patient or they come in or you have that paperwork in front of you, what are they saying, or what does your exam find that has you think, oh, I might want this lab? And then you order such lab. What are some of the key markers that you're looking for, and how do you then tie that into your protocols or your supplements or your lifestyle changes? So sort of that step and that process. We're going to talk about a lot of different labs, but what this class isn't is a deep dive into one lab. For example, I taught a longer class on how to read a Dutch lab. So if you want to watch that class, you're welcome to. That's open to everyone. We can always share that link for you. But a lot of these specific labs, I would potentially spend hours doing that. And in FMA, when we do those classes, we do that deep dive. But otherwise, today is very content rich. So I will be talking pretty fast to make sure you get everything. And we have started recording it, so we'll send out the recording also. Again, we'll do questions at the end. So do keep sharing where you're from. That's always fun to see. And you can talk in the chat box, and I'm going to keep going forward now. Okay, just a disclaimer here. It's an educational class. As always, practice within your scope of practice, and make sure you're doing your own research too. All right, here's an overview. Here's the exact topics we're going to go through in order. Very briefly, why labs? I'll introduce the easy as 1, 2, 3 method. Then one thing I want to say, be careful about drawing. So I'm going to stop sharing real quick. Let's see. All right, I need the button here to be able to stop sharing, and then I'm going to reshare. So this happens periodically for those of you that have that where you can draw on a screen. It sounds like great fun, but when you draw on your screen, it actually gets on the slide. So just try to be careful not to draw on your screen. All right, so we'll do the step 1, step 2, step 3. I'm going to show you a lot of different forms, a lot of different methods for organizing. I will even show you some methods for how to notate labs in electronic medical records. We use Jane, but there's many others out there. That's just our favorite. So there you can see everything we're going to cover, and then we'll do the live Q&A at the end. Okay, very brief introduction as we're still letting people in. If you've never met me before, hi, my name is Dr. Zachary. I love to teach. That's my passion. Every job I've ever done, I've taught in some capacity. My clinic is Body Love Cafe. I act as the clinical director there. I've done thousands and thousands of patient visits, and I don't see individual patients anymore. I just oversee everyone's care, do all the lab training, protocols, and we have a nice big team that continues to grow with many different licenses. So if you want to check it out, that's Body Love Cafe. Functional Medicine Academy is the training company I teach for. So you're welcome to look that up. This is a free class. We try to do free classes whenever we can. And then those who do the paid classes, you know, like this Saturday we have one, and we'll probably be together for 7 hours. So those are really the deep dives. So just tell you a little bit about that. My license is as a doctor of chiropractic going back over 20 years now. And I was a science geek and did peer-reviewed published literature, and you know, had that as a career. A car accident sent me in a different direction, so I wasn't practicing anymore, and I had a completely different career. I created a personality profiling system that was published by McGraw-Hill out of New York. You can see the picture of the book there. And I worked as an executive business coach with a client list of over 20,000, and the vast majority of them were in the health and wellness field. Then there would be some attorneys and real estate agents, people who had to get their own clients or their own patients. And I taught branding and marketing and sales and speaking and all of those things. Then I got terribly sick and had to leave, had to start over, really sort of a dark period in my life. And like I know a lot of people, that's what brought you to functional medicine, and that's what brought me. I did the traditional medical route, and it wasn't working for the issues I was facing. And functional medicine was really what saved the day. So I went back to school, reactivated my license, did full training through IFM, an organization I love, collaborated and continued to learn. You know, it's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of learning. So you have to really love it. But then I opened Body Love Cafe, sort of with nothing. It was this, you know, tiny, less than 100 square feet. It was just me. And I had to expand twice in 1 year, from 4 walls to 22 walls, multiple practitioners. It's, you know, just continues to grow. So I was using the tools that I teach. Anyway, I teach for many other organizations also, but I'm not tied to any of them. So if I share with you a supplement that I like, or a lab that I like, or a software company that I like, that's based on my personal experience. Of course, I always do research. What do I think is going to be the best? But I'm not hired by anyone to endorse them. So just to let you know, free agent here. Okay, so any other questions, let me know, but otherwise I want to just dive into the content. Okay, so very briefly, you know, why use labs? Probably most of you are here because you're already using labs, or maybe you're switching into functional medicine, or you're still furthering your education. In FMA, I have everything from emergency room doctors to pediatricians, radiologists, pharmacists, naturopaths, chiropractors, acupuncturists, health coaches, nurses, you know, students, a huge range, right? If you're not using labs, I love labs, so I highly recommend it. And if you're worried that they're going to be too difficult to use, hopefully after this class, you'll feel much more comfortable, because yes, the learning will continue, but it's really not difficult to get started. And really a lot of fun, in my opinion. Of course, I like geeking out over labs. But it's very helpful in practice because you're bringing in some objective findings, which you can then correlate to the clinical findings, right? We don't want to just look at a lab marker by itself. Labs are often considered the gold standard by patients. So you have to also consider the patient perspective. Labs can be very helpful to measure progress. Is what you're doing working? And it's an essential tool for those of you who are doing telehealth. So that's one thing. After having a brick and mortar clinic for many years, and now we rent smaller spaces for our in-person practitioners and for body workers and hands-on clinicians. The vast majority of our practice is telehealth and telemedicine, and we help set up practices to do that all the time. So if you're not going to be hands-on with the patient, there's only so much you can see over a video. So you have to be excellent at collecting data from them. You have to be excellent at doing that history taking and that interview with the patient, and then lab work really becomes essential. If there's For those of you who don't take paid classes and you want free classes, I have other classes that are very content rich. One that might help you, especially for those of you setting up. There's one called 5 Myths about setting up a functional medicine practice, totally free. And another one, those of you who have already started and you're in it and sort of dealing with the day-to-day, there's one called 7 Practice Problems and How to Solve Them. So those are right on the Functional Medicine Academy website, and you're welcome to utilize them at any time. All right, here's my easy 1, 2, 3 method. Number 1, assess which labs are needed. That's probably the hardest step, quite honestly. So we'll talk about that. Number 2, lab analysis and the key markers. And then number 3, connecting that to the protocols and the supplements. So that's the order we're going to go through these things. So let's do number 1. How do you assess? I just want to make sure Kelly is recording on. We're good. Okay. You know, you forget to record one time, and then it's always good to double check. Been there and done that. Okay. So number 1, how do you assess which lab? So I said this can be the toughest part because sometimes, you know, the better you get at this, you're going to get more and more complex patients. You know, we've had people fly in from other states. We've had other states. We've had people, you know, from other countries. So it will happen. And when they come in and they have so many different symptoms and they have a longer history, you know, there's a big difference between an 8-year-old patient and an 80-year-old patient, right? How much life have they lived? They're going to be saying things and you're going to be finding things and you're thinking, I need this lab and I need that one and I need that one. So it's hard to limit it. And I always tell patients, I'm trying to limit it to the smallest amount of labs possible to let me know what I really need to know that will give me, you know, the most information also for their dollar. So some of you might be in a situation where based on your license or your location, you're able to bill for labs, but the vast majority of situations, patients are paying for labs. So we don't want to have them spend a lot of money on labs, certainly not unnecessarily. It can really eat up a lot of the patient's budget when that could be spent on actions that could help them get better. And that's what we always want to focus on. So you want to ask yourself, what must you know, and what can you absolutely not miss? And that jumps to the top of the list. And then what is it you want to know? And what is the patient interested in learning? So those things might be, you know, more lower on the list. Maybe we'll do it later, or maybe we're going to start with this and see how you progress. And then are those labs really needed? So often we'll create a priority list now versus later. What is best? Like what, you know, what would I love to know versus this patient said I can order 1 lab. Boy, that's a tough situation, but it happens. I actually love it the more labs they have or they come in with, because I can get the whole picture right at one time. So when they're able to do it, great, but we certainly don't force that. And the vast majority will do some labs and then we'll pick up more later. Something else that I suggest that you do for your office, I teach a little bit more about like being the business owner, because of course you're not just the doctor or the practitioner, you're also human resources and, you know, the cleaning crew and the bookkeeper and the marketing and, you know, all of that. So I teach a bit more about the behind the scenes of running a practice in FMA 1. But one thing that I think would be helpful for you as the practitioner and also your team is to have a list of the most common labs that you use, the ones that you find most helpful, they're just your top 5 or your top 10, and then maybe your specialty labs that you use on occasion. And then every now and then there's going to be that patient who comes in and you need to do some research and come up with a lab you've never ordered before. But you don't want that to be the situation every time, or having a sustainable practice will be untenable. It just you won't be efficient enough. So you cannot be reinventing the wheel every time. Okay, example of labs we commonly use. This may or may not be your case, but this is what we commonly use. Blood tests, you know, basic blood labs, and then ABA stands for Advanced Intestinal Barrier Assessment. That's our leaky gut test. We use precision point labs for that. Same with the Allergy 88. Our favorite stool test is GI map. Certainly patients come in with all the others and I have to teach them, so you need to know how to read all of them. Urine tests, we'll use Dutch, standard, and also reflex to culture, UA, oats tests. Breath test most commonly is SIBO. Some of the specialty tests we'll use are some genetic testing, methylation, maybe Lyme, or certain allergy, micronutrients on occasion, but you know, not all the time. It's a much smaller percentage. So here's an example of how we list it. It's just sort of a smaller piece so you can see, and you may want to do something more detailed or less detailed. I'm a big fan of using Google. It's free. Of course, we do have a paid account because we actually made it HIPAA compliant and whatnot. But there's no patient data shared here. This is just information. It's, you know, in the cloud, so your virtual workers can see it in different locations. It says some of our most commonly used tests on the left, which I just mentioned to you, the name of the lab test, the company that provides it, the type, stool, urine, blood, breath, some of the key symptoms, you know, that have you thinking this might be a helpful test, some additional symptoms, some supplements that you want to avoid because you might have patients coming in and they're on something and they need to stop before taking that test. Is fasting required? So there's an example of that. Here's a few blood tests. Now, we use LabCorp all the time, but we also use Boston Heart because for some of the advanced heart markers and inflammation markers, which I'm teaching in extreme detail this Saturday, because that's actually the class this Saturday is all about cardiometabolic health for functional medicine practitioners. So one of the reasons we use Boston Heart is because they can let you create your own little lab panel, give it the name you want. We didn't do anything fancy. We said advanced heart markers and advanced inflammation panel, but you could come up with a creative name if you wanted. And they just offered a more affordable price for our patients to get that grouping of markers we wanted versus going through LabCorp or some other place. So that's one of the reasons that we use them. And then you can see some of the markers here. So do we always get a thyroid panel through Boston Heart? Not always, but they let us put together a panel. Lovely. Sometimes we might just want, you know, a few markers. Maybe we'll get that through LabCorp. All right, how to assess which lab. So you want to connect the sign and the symptoms from the patients in the interview, in the history. Our intake, by the way, I shared this in FMA1 in detail. We spent years building it, and probably 30 different functional medicine and nutrition practices intakes went into that, plus our experience. Like, how could we get everything we needed to know and try to make it as small and as manageable as possible, be it efficient so your eye could go through it. First, we had to make it work on paper, and then we had to make it work digitally. So it's a lot of work that goes in, but I think it's a thing of beauty now, and it allows us to be so efficient. And now it's automatic. A patient books an appointment, they receive that, they complete it online, it comes in. Anyway, I'm not going to get through all that because it's the wrong topic for today, but it's the start of us already thinking which lab, if any, do we need. Okay, so I just gave you a few examples. This is not comprehensive at all, and I will show you a few more examples, but you know, you have that patient who says they wake up, they feel normal, their bloating gets worse as the day goes on. You're thinking maybe SIBO, you start asking additional questions. And not everything links to ordering a lab, of course. It triggers further questions. And then depending on the patient's answers, you say, that doesn't sound right, we're gonna move in this direction. Or yes, that sounds accurate, let me explore further. And then it might be ordering a lab. Constipation, antibiotic use, abdominal pain. We start seeing triggers like that. We might be thinking a GI map. Sugar cravings that are worse at night. They have signs of fungus or yeast overgrowth. Then we might be thinking of an oats test, organic acid test with some of the, like a rabenose as a marker. Maybe they have rashes, acne, and food sensitivities. We might be thinking leaky gut. We might be thinking food, histamine response. We might be thinking yeast. Instead of ordering 3 tests, especially if they say only one, maybe we'll say the allergy 88, which has true allergies, IgE. It has IgG4, an immune blocking response. It has IgG, it has C3D. So it has a nice little allergy sensitivity food cascade, but it also has a marker for Candida and mold. So you get a little extra bang for your buck. So if I had to pick one in that example, I would go for that. Someone comes in, they either have autoimmune issues or it's a concern, a lot of inflammation, allergies, and pain. I might be thinking of a leaky gut test. The one I like is ABA. I don't like the other ones as much. I teach another detail in a class. I have so much to cover. I'm going to keep going, but that's just my personal favorite. Maybe someone has weight gain, low mood, slow bowel, hair loss. You might be thinking thyroid panel. If you have a vegetarian, they're feeling really tired, low energy. They start looking pale, right? They're losing some of their natural skin color and tone. Maybe you're thinking an iron panel. High waist to hip ratio. They get hangry, right? Hungry and angry before the next meal. They can't really skip a meal. They're eating that standard American diet. They have a family history of heart disease or diabetes. So maybe you're thinking some cardiometabolic blood testing. We would do our sugar panel, which is fasting glucose, fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, C-peptide, adiponectin, leptin. And then we would do our advanced heart markers and our inflammation panel. And really, that sounds like a lot. It's some lovely markers, but actually those 3 tests are very inexpensive. Let's say you get someone with detox issues. They're sensitive to smells, right? They don't have any tolerance for like alcohol or medications. You're suspicious of maybe fatty liver, or maybe they already have a diagnosis. History of toxin exposure, maybe at work or home, migraines, hair loss, lots of brain fog. You might be thinking toxicity testing. It's usually not something we leap into. Those tests can tend to be more expensive, and there's a lot we can do in other areas that sometimes solves that problem. But if there's a real obvious need for it, we might go for it right from the beginning. We've had that situation and literally brought someone back from the brink of being gone. Someone in 39, 40 years old who got denied for a life insurance exam because of how downhill their health had gone. Low libido, insomnia, high stress, fertility issues. Maybe they're in perimenopause or getting into menopause. Acne, irritability. Maybe you're thinking Dutch hormone testing. So that's the big thing with step 1. What do they say? What do you see? What have you asked? And how do you tie that into labs? And then how do you prioritize them? So I train doctors all the time. Our doctors in our practice, but also, doctors who don't work for us. So as we're training, we're always trying to come up with how can we teach these to people, make it simple, make it faster, especially when you come from medical school, chiropractic college, you've done the full IFM course, you've taken A4M courses, whatever you did, and you have this huge amount of knowledge, which is wonderful. But then how do you narrow it down and become efficient in practice and quick? That's really essential to have a practice that works. And not only do you need to train the practitioners, but you have to train your staff. Because you may have health coaches working for you, or you may have front desk staff or virtual assistants that are helping to place the lab orders. Are they going to know everything you know? Absolutely not, but they're going to be very well informed. If you take the time to train them, they will be invaluable for answering the phone, answering emails, getting a lot off your plate, communicating with your patients, dealing with labs, all of those things. So these are some of the things that we put together to meet that need. Some of the, when might we want some blood tests? We just gave a few examples. There's times these were even check marks where that's why you see boxes. Maybe someone just wanted a wellness, like there's nothing really wrong with them. Maybe they came to your office because they just want a wellness and assessment. I'm 45, where am I in life? I don't have any main symptom, but I just sort of want to check in, make sure I'm going in the right direction, you know, and inexpensive, blood labs read from a functional and nutritional perspective could be very insightful. I gave some of the SIBO breath test examples, GI map, you know, history of food poisoning, things like that. So some of these just help people see, because there's going to be overlap, right? Acne isn't always a SIBO breath test, right? It could be a stool test. It could be a hormone test. It could be a leaky gut test. So it could be a food sensitivity test. So you have to start finding these common symptoms, and where do you get a few clues that add up that have you go, oh, not allergy testing, stool testing, you know, what's going to have you go to the left or to the right. Here's a few other examples we gave, some of the things that would have us lead towards, yes, we want that test first. For example, that ABA test that I mentioned that I like so much, it's not the cheapest test. I could get cheaper ones, but that one I think is superior to most of the tests out there. So that's why I still use that one. But I don't order it all the time because of the price. If it was cheap, honestly, I would order it probably with most people. So because it's not the cheapest one, I'm very selective, and it's usually lower on the priority list, or maybe it's something we do later after we've done the basics, we've made a lot of progress. Maybe there's just a few little things left, and that's going to reveal a new piece of information. When does it jump to the very top of the list? I'm thinking of an example where a patient came in, actually another medical provider, and that I wrote a case review about, that came in and would get, I've had many patients like this, but with food would get a red rash, usually all over their torso. So extreme, histamine intolerance, possibly even mast cell activation. So this test, based on the whole clinical picture that I saw in the exam, jumped to the top of the list. When ordering labs, of course, you have to always see, first of all, do you even have a license to order labs? And then depending on your license, are you billing for them? Is the patient paying for it? Making sure that you use them within your scope of practice. And we'll talk a little bit about the legal parts and telehealth, so I'll cover that briefly. Opening up accounts with the individual lab companies. So when we had, almost everything was our big brick and mortar clinic. So that price, Kelly, just so you know, that's, I don't think that's the accurate price. So it depends on practitioner license. So you really have to look it up. I think the lowest you can get it is 300, but it's going to be a range. And sometimes they have specials too. If a lab ever has a sale and it's a good test, we pass it on to the patients and let them know. So that lab once had a 2-for-1 sale, which was fabulous. I've never seen them do it again. I wish they would. It was great. Okay, so we used to have a full-time staff member that her job was ordering labs, looking in 10 different lab portals each day, communicating with patients, drop shipping all the test kits. I mean, it was just a lot of work. Now we use Rupa Health. I've taught for them many times. I don't work for them. I think they're great though, love them. We were one of their early users, and they have a very minimal fee, which we line item out. The patient pays the fee, and it's sort of like having a free staff member. So you just place the order. They use almost every lab company we would want. There's very few times we have to go outside of Rupa Health. So I'd say like 95% of the time we're ordering through Rupa Health. We place the order, they communicate instructions to the patient, they offer some customer service, they drop ship the kits to them, they get the reports, they let us know when they're ready. And that way, if we had to have labs from 5 different companies, we're only logging into Rupa Health. So it's great. Priority of labs already mentioned. Remember also about that, that partnership that we're always trying to create in functional medicine, that partnership between the doctor and the patient. So how you communicate labs is part of creating that partnership. And I put in, I think I'll show it to you. Yeah, I'll show it to you next. I put in a little ebook that you can grab. Some of you have it already, and it has information from that book I published with McGraw-Hill, and it has some information that's never been published about practitioner to patient communication. And so you can just grab that freebie if you want it. So here's where you get it, tinyurl.com, patient talk. Kelly put it in there for you. I showed a few shots of it, and you're welcome to download it. Hopefully that'll be helpful for you. Okay, still on step one, a few more things to consider. I just want to give you some examples. When you're talking about labs, so many different opportunities to communicate it, even more than I can say now, because you can communicate on your website. And I covered that in FMA 6, the class all about marketing. I didn't even really talk about it today. But you could visit Body Love Cafe and look at the tab where we talk about it as an example. Another example is a free resource we give to our patients, or just even, you know, the public stopping by our website and maybe wanting to check something out, is we have a resource called 15 Darn Things Keeping You Fat or Sick. So it's a little ebook. It talks about the 15 things, trying to educate the patient, let them learn a little bit more about how their body works. And then at the end, there's 2 pages that talks about each of those 15 things. Like, if I thought I had number 1, what would the assessment or labs look like for it? So is it always going to be that 100% of the time? No, but we wanted to give them an example. So that's one of the ways that you can start educating the public and patients about these labs. We also will teach live classes. So we're about to do that now. So I gave you another example, a link. This is for patients. Certainly practitioners take it, but it's geared towards patients and community. And we do 5 classes in a row, and we will absolutely be educating them, not just about their body and their health and weight loss and hormones and sleep and stress, but we'll talk about labs and how they work and what the markers look like and how they reveal. And these are ways that you can not only educate the public, but attract patients to you who want to work with you without being salesy or having to be aggressive or assertive or charge high amounts or any of those types of things, or, you know, long contracts, and we don't have to do any of that. All right, this is an example of that freebie. So that's something for patients. You see it as Body Love Cafe on it. I'm going to answer that question. Let's make sure we do that. So some of you have questions about different states and different licenses for lab ordering. We have practitioners in different states, so we know a fair amount about it. So we'll get that in the Q&A. And thank you. When you put the questions in the chat now, it's great, because then we're ready for them at the end. Okay, so I just wanted to show you, this was the example of how I said. So these are some of the 15 things, right? Chemicals can put weight gain on, leptin resistance, you know, microbiome changes. And then we just said, what would be some of our assessment tools? Let's see, did I show you both? Yeah, so I showed you 2 pages. So that's an example where we're educating. Here's the example of the classes we're teaching. Again, this is for the public. And you can see how we use marketing language, the chemistry of food, digestion, craving, allergies revealed, the stress mess. You know, if I just say like HPA access, or, you know, HPA access dysfunction and dysregulation, patients are not going to sign up for that class. It's not exciting. So I have to really, you know, take that information and put it in a format that's going to be accessible for them. All right, so just wanted to give you some examples. So that is step 1. How do you gather some information, start thinking about the labs and making a decision? All right, step 2, lab analysis. So there's lots of lab education out there, functional medicine training, additional research you can do. And it's really wonderful if you are doing research, especially in the beginning, but you are not going to be able to do a ton of research for every lab, for every patient all the time. You have to create methods. Otherwise, you either won't be able to have an efficient practice because you're going to be spending 10 hours on every new patient who comes in, or you're going to have to charge the patients a fortune to compensate for that time, and you're going to have like 10 patients. So it's a logistics thing for sure. And then also lab reports. So here's a couple examples. First of all, whatever your license is, they probably gave you good training, and they probably have ongoing continuing education. So always looking back to them first. What additional functional medicine and nutrition training can you do? And I love additional training. I think it should be a lifetime thing. I also just want to say here, make sure you actually get into action too. So don't wait until you know it all, because that will never arrive, and you want to make sure you start. So FMA, Functional Medicine Academy, I already mentioned that. IFM, I've mentioned. Dutch is an example, like the Dutch test. If you like that, they have a lot of free training videos on their website. Or Oates does, probably GI Map does. I teach it so often, I haven't even looked at their site in a long time. So probably every lab, certainly if they're big enough, good quality lab, they should have some training available. I mentioned research. What we did, I created my first version over 5 years ago now, but we actually created software where we can just punch in the numbers. Instead of doing this over and over again for each patient, we can punch in the numbers, and it has like the conventional medicine range and then the functional medicine optimal range. Says what the marker is, what its significance could be, what do you, when do you usually see this, high or low, or, whatever it is. What are the lifestyle recommendations? What are some of the supplements you might want to be thinking about? So we've used that in our practice for many years. And then we've been building Functional Med Labs, which is a web-based software app that anyone could use that should finally be out in spring, which will be great. And that has not just blood markers, but also stool testing and breath testing and hormone testing and Dutch and ABA and a lot. So there's a lot in there. So whatever your method is, you want something where you can be fast. All right, this was just an example. So these classes on the left are 2 of the FMA classes. Those are paid classes. This on the right, this is a free class. That's that Dutch test I gave you. And again, many resources. I just tried to give like a behind the scenes nitty gritty. Here's how you do it. How do you use their tools and get answers? So you're welcome to check that out. Here's some of the examples I just mentioned. 2 of these are classes I taught for Rupa. So again, I don't work for them, but they have, different instructors come in and teach. So that SIBO testing, a deep dive, it's actually my short version, but it's very detailed. And then I taught GI Map versus GI effects. Here's, I can't remember if that's a practitioner or if he works for the company teaching about Dutch. Here's Great Plains. They do Oates and other tests. Some of their, look at 371 videos that they offer. So plenty of education out there. And then also good labs will have good quality reports. So here's an example of Precision Point and their ABA test, the one I was telling you about. This comes right with every report. This one part here, intestinal barrier dysfunction, associated symptoms and conditions, that's not in it. That's a little bit diving in deeper. But these other 3 sheets you see are all part of the report. I think it's 6 pages total. Quite a good amount of information for both the practitioner and the patient. This is an example I showed you. This is not what the software app looks like, but this is some of the data we pull. So an example of a thyroid marker, the typical medical range. This would not get flagged, but functionally it gets flagged. What are some of the significance and what are some of the lifestyle changes or supplements we might want to consider? Here's another example. This is GI Map though. So one of the markers, what does it mean? Some of this is going to be, straight from the clinical reference guide or the white paper written by the lab and some of their research. Others is, functional medicine information, clinical wisdom, experiences with patients and supplements to use, things like that. There's another example. You can make this yourself. I mean, it's a lot of work, but you can make a smaller version and use it in your practice. There's organizations that have some, not just ours. There's other companies out there that use it. There's resources from labs. But it all comes down to how can you really take in a fair amount of information quickly, make a decision, move forward, and you have to be efficient. So we'll talk a little bit more too about, when to refer and some of the red flags. All right, so still in lab analysis, when you see these lab reports, especially some of these long lab reports, and you're going to have those patients that show up with a 7-inch binder of previous labs, you need to be able to pick out markers quick. You need to be able to scan labs and not spend 15 minutes looking up every line in a 70 marker report, and know when does something, like when is it a red flag, an emergency, or they need a referral, or when is it you need to not do something. And then you need to be able to find those markers that tell you, yes, here is something I do need to do, an action I need to take. So this is not comprehensive at all, but I just want to give you some examples. On GI map, if you see elastase under 200, enzyme produced by the pancreas, and that is a deficient level to be produced. Oats, arabinose being high is a key marker for potential candida overgrowth. On the ABA, when you see high histamine and low DAO, the enzyme that breaks down histamine, you're looking at potential histamine intolerance. Allergy 88, you see aspergillus high, and there's also might be a sign of mold. You might see a high gluten IgE marker, but they're not celiac, so they could have a true gluten allergy, non-celiac. SIBO, maybe you see high methane with constipation. It's not in the small intestines. It's what they call intestinal methanogen overgrowth. Could be in the small intestines, might be more likely in the large intestines. Dutch, maybe you see a hormone imbalance. Maybe you see a high 4-hydroxy pathway, and maybe it was a woman with a COMT SNP who's on a synthetic hormone replacement therapy, who's now over 60. So you're starting to get concerned. Is she visiting her OBGYN regularly? Is she getting a mammogram? Have we scanned for estrogenic cancers? How can we improve this metabolism? Are we past the phase of having this hormone replacement therapy? So lots of key questions. Genetics, already mentioned COMT SNP. Here's an example, short clip of what we do with some of our practitioners and how we put labs in the portal for the patient. So we put the labs in, our team of health coaches and admins will load the labs. The practitioner will review them, attach key handouts. So we give resources to the patients. We give simple ways to understand it. We share the more detailed lab resources. We let our team know. We train weekly. It's just ongoing. So we're just a high training office, very different than a lot of offices. So they have videos they can watch. We tell them key things to watch out for, maybe typical supplements we use, things to hold before doing a test. So we just have that all written out as instructions. Okay, some red flags, referrals, and when do you need new labs? So sometimes you're ordering labs or you're reviewing a lab they brought in and you realize a new one is needed, right? One example, we've had to do this many times. We've caught cancer many times and had the surgeon say we saved the patient's life because they were way far, too many years before a colonoscopy would be recommended, but they had high calprotectin and high blood, and turned out they had colon cancer. And when we see that at certain levels, we're insisting they get a colonoscopy immediately. So it's an immediate referral. And of course, there's other markers that will be red flags. So things you need to know. Always practicing within your scope. Make sure you follow local, state, and federal licensing laws, especially with the last year and a half. Rules have sometimes been different from county to county. It's been a lot of work on the admin side of things. And there's much to do to help patients at every level. So whether your license allows you to order every test easily, or you only order certain tests, or maybe the patient can only get direct-to-consumer tests and you look at them together from an educational standpoint. Or, you know, some of you don't use labs at all, but you're probably not on this call. There's still many things you can do to help the patient at each of those levels. So, you know, don't despair if, you know, there's a lab that's not available for you. That's all right. If the patient really needs that lab, you collaborate or you refer to someone who can order it for them. So we can talk about that in Q&A if someone has questions. You want to also delineate between diagnosing versus educating, and sometimes that depends on your license and or how you're communicating with patients. So I go through that in much more detail in FMA 1 and FMA 6, but just make sure you have consulted your legal advisors and you're operating correctly. Make sure, regardless of your license, you're not making any outlandish claims. No matter how wonderful the lab is, it is a piece of information, and we always have to tie it to that clinical picture. And always make sure that you're not being alarmist, right? So we don't want to overpromise. We don't want to say something is worse than it is or not as bad as it is, right? You can go either way. And you also don't want to do a pill per marker. Even when, like, for example, when we use the functional med labs, the software, you know, any marker that's out of range, it's going to tell you what it means, things to do, and potential supplements. You don't then go and say, oh, there's 10 markers that are high, here's these 10 supplements. It doesn't work like that. You have to really put it all together. And that's the beauty of functional medicine, right? All right, sharing findings with the patient. Again, how do you communicate with the patient? Because how you talk to colleagues or how you're communicating with the lab is going to be different than how you communicate with the patient. And you need to make it so they can understand it. So I had already shared that link about communicating with them. Sort of a little bit more what I said already. Are you doing a medical versus nutritional approach, diagnosis versus that functional cascade and working with the natural physiology of the body? And then how do you organize and present your findings? Because you're going to get those complex cases. So some people who have been trained through IFM might use the matrix. We tweaked that and did that a little bit differently. It's a good system. Sometimes not fully efficient for day-to-day doing that with every single patient. Some people who do want to do that, they might use a software like the Living Matrix. That could be helpful. Doesn't do all the functions that an EMR would. So, you know, there's pros and cons to everything. We created a system in FMA called the Report of Findings Grid. That was very helpful, sort of a simpler, faster way to put it together. And now we do that differently also, because if we're going to do it electronically, we put it together in a different way. So it really doesn't matter which way that you do it, as long as you get the answer you need and you can then communicate it. Or maybe you have a PDF report from a software. I wrote Functional Med Labs as an example, or maybe it's from the lab company or something like that, but some method and some system so you can communicate with patients. Let's see, I'm going to show you a few sort of screenshots from Jane software. We like Jane a lot. Yes, we have all those things in FMA 1. We have paper versions too, because not everyone does it electronically. Some are paper offices. We used to be old school. It's fun. But love it, and I wouldn't go back. So when we researched, Jane was the one we chose, and I really like them a lot. And I know there's many good ones out there. A lot of them are very similar. So if I show you something that looks like it's just with Jane, you most likely could do it with yours also. Making sure you share labs in a HIPAA compliant patient portal, of course, having disclosures and disclaimers in there, and then you know, your analysis and ways to get more information. So here's a few examples. One, these are images from Precision Point, their Allergy 88 test. That's an example of the report. And on the right are just two little shots from their, I think it's 25 pages, their diagnostic guide. So we do more than this, but that would be an example of something where we would have the lab, we would give them the guide, we actually give them some additional information, and then we would go over it with them. Here's an example. If you've taken IFM courses and you are a member, you have access to some of their tools. So here's an example of one of their elimination diet food plans, just a 2-page handout, simple version. On the right is a longer version, very comprehensive guide. You would not want to be printing that for a patient. You'd want to give that electronically. I think it's like 40 pages. Could be wrong, but it's quite long. This was a screenshot we took from the GI map interpretive guide. Really nice 5R framework grid and some supplements, not brand name, but the ingredients. So some of the herbs and probiotics and fiber and immunoglobulins, things you would use at each of these 5R levels. So we'll use that and share that. This is an IFM handout, a food reintroduction symptom tracker. So if you're gonna do the elimination diet and then reintroduce it, that's a great handout. If you're not an IFM member, just make your own, simple, easy to do. Here's some examples, just little screenshots I took from a chart. So for example, Allergy 88 next steps. In Jane, this is a phrase. We have to type /AL, boom, it all appears. And this is an example, trying to make it as simple as possible for the patient. So they came in step 1, we determined that an Allergy 88 test, and in this example, an ABA test made sense. 2, we got the findings, we went over them, we started coming up with the plan, and number 3, we're going to tie it in to the protocol and the actions we take. And in this case, the action is patient has to decide with the practitioner, are we going to do the least restrictive diet, the most restrictive diet, or customize a diet based on immune reactivity? Most often we customize it. Then how long are we going to do it? The patient says, I'm going to give you 4 weeks and that's it, forget it. Or will they go longer, 6 weeks? Or as the lab recommends, a few months, right? It depends on what the patient's bandwidth is and how sick are they and what's the conversation you have with them. In this case, we were recommending a good digestive aid, something to drive down the histes while we were doing it. And we gave them GI Revive. You can't see it there, but we gave them something to work to support gut health, the lining, leaky gut, etc., while having this diet that was cutting down on the inflammation. Try to encourage as much healing during that time. And then the food reintroduction tracking journal to reintroduce it. So clear instructions, it's right in the chart, it's fast and efficient for the practitioner to put it in there. This was an example. This is one of the sections in our chart notes, which becomes our after visit summary. And Kelly, if you can share the charting demo link, this is on Functional Medicine Academy website. So if you don't get this link, that's where it is later. But I did about an hour. It was mostly Jane users, but again, anyone could do it, about how we use that chart, that charting template, and then immediately have it ready. So 1 minute later, we're done. It becomes an after visit summary, goes to the patient, etc. So this would be an example of some notes that were written in the lab work. Here's another example on the left here. Here's a standard thing, going over your lab results. We'll discuss it in detail. Please make sure you share labs with your MD, primary care physician. Even our MD on staff puts us on all their labs, right? Because we're a functional medicine practice and nutrition. We are not acting as primary care providers. We want to make sure they share their labs with all their providers. So instead of having to I mean, we do say it all the time, but instead of having to like write it out every time, it's automatic. We make it a chart template or we make it a phrase. It it actually is in there over and over again. The patient can't miss it. All right, here's an example. You can sort of see the screenshot. This is what Jane looks like. I've just blacked out all the patient information. Here's an example of a lab report that was loaded in, and if you click it, you would see the rest of the pages. So it looks like one page, but it's all there. And then right below it, it says SIBO handout. This is a screenshot of the SIBO informational handout. It's actually many pages. So we're providing additional information for the patient, and that helps to facilitate the discussion between the practitioner and the patient. So there's an example there. Here's another example. Again, it just depends on what your style is and what you want to do. An example on the left of, we sort of had like, you know, a list of information. You could check it if it was applicable. This is a GI map, and then it had specific notes about that patient's markers. Most of these come right from the lab notes, but instead of reading a 40-page document, it's simplified for the patient and for the patient's chart. Here's an example, a screenshot of details from blood labs that was run through our software, and then some other, you know, detail notes. So, you know, many different ways to do that. There's that charting demo class. So that's the one that Kelly just put in for you. You can see on the screenshot here an example of, here's some example of some digestive questions. So if it was applicable, like it was a yes, the patient was having sugar cravings, you could check it and put in a little note. So you want your charting to be as fast as possible. Lab work to order, your list might be entirely different. That's great. But this way, the practitioner, if they think they need a test, they can check it. There's a box underneath. If they need further instructions, they can write in there. All right, that's all step 2. Now, step 3, connecting it to the clinical picture. So just a few to go through, and then we'll do Q&A. So I know it's 5, but if you can give me like 4 minutes, I should be able to get through this. All right, and again, so many examples, I just want to give you a few. So consider the patient goals, always bring it back to that, because their goals might be different than yours. You might have discovered the most amazing thing, root cause issues, you want to go after it, and the patient says, I want to lose 5 pounds and I'm out of here, that's it. So you can certainly educate them, but don't bother trying to convince them. Just do a good job for what they want. Have the patient be happy. You've informed them. And then if they want to come back later, they will. If something goes wrong later, they know how to find you, right? We always let the patient be in charge in that way. And also, even if they do want root cause, if they came in for, let's say, migraines and acne, and you discovered some hidden infection and some intestinal barrier issues and things like that, and you are getting really excited about that and sort of, you know, getting down into the minutia, and the patient can't see how that is connected back into their symptoms of migraine and acne, they're going to get lost. So you have to really always be aware of what the patient wants. Where are they at? What are they thinking? Don't leave them on an endless protocol. It really is not designed to be that way. You want to reevaluate. If you need to retest. Sometimes it might not make sense to do everything at once. Even if you have a patient who says, yeah, you know, let's go after it hardcore. Are they ready for it? There might be financial considerations. It might be that they're in too much pain, or they're too stressed, or they're too depressed, or everything's too fired up. Lots of inflammation, that you need to do some palliative care or calm things down, or get them out of a state of crisis and less panic attacks before they can move forward, right? You might not want to be doing a huge, you know, kill protocol in the gut that's going to make them feel worse before you've made them feel better. So, you know, that's the individual aspect of functional medicine and patient care. And start connecting those labs to protocols. So what's your differential? What is it you see again and again? How does the lab support, or, maybe something stands out and it doesn't fit the clinical picture. So that's another way you'll catch red flags. All right, I wanted to give a few examples. And I said, someone had asked me, I can't remember who it was. It was 2 people on Facebook and 1 via email. I told them that Functional Medicine Academy was doing a sale, and it's only for 5 days. We haven't even announced it yet, but Kelly, you can share the code if you want. It's 30% off. So it doesn't happen too often, and sometimes those higher sales don't come back again, but you can use it for any one class or even all of them. So just to let you know, I think it starts tonight or tomorrow and it goes for 5 days. So whenever it works online, that's when it's going. All right, let me tell you these steps. And what made me think about it is we go through these labs in more detail. Okay, so step 1, patient history of multiple antibiotic use. They had thrush following antibiotics. Signs and symptoms included acne, rash, anxiety, sugar cravings worse at night, toe fungus lasting longer than 3 months, several UTIs, recent BV, diet is high in simple sugars, started getting dandruff. You're thinking of testing for yeast via oats or maybe GI map or allergy 88 test. So thinking of different labs that might show it. You decided to choose oats, and multiple markers were high for fungus and yeast, including high arabinose. Step 3, you recommended an anti-candida diet. You gave an oil of oregano supplement, a probiotic. You used Colorex wash, which has red horpedo leaf in it. I love that. Educating them about tongue scraping, getting rest while their body's working on this. So obviously it's going to be more involved in that, but just wanted to give you a little snapshot, step 1, 2, 3. Let's do another quick example. Step 1, patient history of skipping menses last 6 months after turning 50. Signs and symptoms include low libido, 7-pound weight gain, increased waist to hip ratio, some vaginal dryness. They're feeling irritable. Acne starting to appear along the chin that is cystic, some flushing and temperature regulation issues, not quite hot flashes, thinking of testing hormone levels via the Dutch. Step 2, you get the lab. The markers show below normal estrogen and progesterone levels, confirming, getting into perimenopause. The testosterone levels are elevated, not high on their own, but they're elevated relative to that lower estrogen and progesterone, and shows that this patient has a preference for 5A reductase, a more androgenic form of testosterone. So you decide to start with some supplemental estrogen and progesterone, not going for full bioidentical hormones. So sort of a low dose combo with follow-up in 2 weeks. You added some saw palmetto, told them to have some mint and nettle tea. Considering a topical cream for dryness temporarily. You're giving some meal plans and doing some education regarding blood sugar balancing, proper sleep hygiene, stress reduction. You're slowly going to have them increase activity with walking, adding some weights, possibly working with a trainer. And then depending on the progress, we'll direct, which direction you go. All right, another example, step 1. Patient history of IBS mixed, right? So some diarrhea, some constipation, a history of food poisoning. She's had multiple abdominal surgery. She's hypothyroid. Her current sign and symptoms include gas, reflux, bloating. She says the classic, I look pregnant at the end of the day. I can't eat onions or garlic. I feel worse when I tried taking probiotics. Everyone says they're so good for me. Why do I feel worse? Recent high stress situation at work. And after that, 4 months of constipation. Everything got worse with the constipation. She did have a full GI workup and a colonoscopy. They were all within normal limits. They said, nothing's wrong with you, must just be that IBS. Go home and have some fiber. She has some fiber. She blows up like a balloon. You're thinking of a breath test for SIBO. So you're trying to decide, am I going to choose the 2-marker breath test, methane and hydrogen, or am I going to do the 3-marker with hydrogen sulfide? Based on the recent constipation for 4 months, you choose the 2-marker. You want the 3 hours, not 2. You want lactulose. So you're making these decisions. And then after that, right, because you can do some things while you're waiting for lab test to come back, you have the patient test the low FODMAP diet for 3 weeks and see what happens. All right, step 2, you have the lab report. You have the patient back. you find out that the markers show elevated methane all throughout the small intestines and large intestines. The patient reports less symptoms with that low FODMAP diet. So you discuss the 3 typical treatment options when presented with a methane overgrowth, and the best protocol for the patient concerning that also considers their current lifestyle, right? What's going on for them is the elemental diet for 2 weeks, followed by low FODMAP, including you recommend a digestive aid, a prokinetic, some magnesium with Triphalia after the elemental diet. You educate them about meal spacing. You give them a referral for some visceral massage work. They meet with your health coach to learn about doing some vagal tone exercises and some stress management. And you retest in 6 weeks. So step 1, step 2, step 3. And it has to be efficient. Your brain has to connect these quickly and to keep everything moving. Okay, last example, and then we're going to dive into Q&A here. All right, so step 1, patient history of infections, autoimmune disease, SIBO, anxiety, depression, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, multiple medical practitioners, and history of previous functional medicine doctors. Brought in a binder of previous labs, including blood, urine, stool, and genetic testing. This may sound like a crazy complicated patient. We get them all the time. Additional signs and symptoms include insomnia, fatigue, food sensitivities, occasional flushing or rash, irregular bowel movements, frequent UTIs. We reviewed the extensive labs. We did order an immunoglobulin panel due to the frequent infections throughout childhood as an adult. No one had done it before. We added allergy 88 and ABA testing. Those were the only things really missing from the extensive testing brought in. Step 2, the past labs and new labs reveal a potential missed patient. If you've never heard of that, we've taught about it before. The research article on it hasn't been published yet, but you can watch the presentation. Kelly can put in the short version, and at some point I'll teach you the longer version. No primary immune disorder, so that was good. That got ruled out. Multiple IgE allergies, plus IgG sensitivities, yeast and mold were present, high histamine, low DAO. So step 3, scheduled weekly health coaching visits for support. Complicated case, lots of issues, needs more high touch, want to make it affordable. So health coaching for the accountability. Practitioner visits 2 times a month. So sometimes it can be 1 time a month or longer, but this needed 2 times a month. Prescribed LDN, referred to a psychiatrist for potential ketamine treatment due to the history and current depression, pain, and anxiety. If you're not familiar with some of that research, I taught that in the recent depression class. And also to try to break that sensitized syndrome and regional pain syndrome cycle. So that's not in our office, but there are clinics we can refer them to. Elimination diet that was created specific to her allergy testing, provided a digestive aid with DAO plus a supplemental version, antihistamine before meals. And then we focused on palliative and pain relief and digestive response before addressing the root cause issues based on what was going on with this patient. So we had to move slowly, high touch care. We recommended GABA, SPMs, and melatonin also as part of the palliative care. Okay. I'm going to answer questions next. But what's next and options for support? Again, I didn't even cover all the free recordings. There's tons out there, not just with us, but with other places. We always try to put a lot of good research and information on ours. So of course, I'm biased. I think ours is best. But you can grab those at Functional Medicine Academy, thefunctionalmedicineacademy.com. The deep dive SIBO, I can't remember if it's on there. It might be on there. If not, just email us. We'll tell you where to find it. Otherwise, everything there I see is right on that page. Functional Medicine Academy classes, if you ever want those, you can always just take one. You don't have to do the certification. And if you do want to do the certification, you could be certified as soon as the end of April if you did the work. Otherwise, you have up to 2 years. You don't have to rush it. That's what the website looks like. There's the link. So if you want to check it out, there you go. This just shows you a little bit of the certification for those who just take and complete classes. You can get the certificate of completion for a class. Otherwise, depending on your license, you can become FMACP or FMACC, so certified practitioner or certified coach. That shows you the classes. FMA 4 is on Saturday. That's our deep dive into cardiometabolic. So yes, we're doing those labs. Every marker, how to read it, where to order it, what it means, you know, what the protocol is. That's all Saturday. So everyone who's in FMA, we're spending a lot of time together. These other ones that are clinical, they're coming up. FMA 5 is at the end of January. These gut health ones, I believe, are both in February. And the hormone one, I think, is in March. The ones already in the portal now, these two are not clinical, but of course, well, I can't say FM1's not entirely clinical, but these are very important for practice. So FMA 1 is all about doing the exam, doing the report of findings, communicating with the patient, setting up your practice, setting up your steps of service. If you don't know what that means, that's very important for your practice and for the patient. So very detailed. And then FMA 6, the other one in there is all marketing. So all how to be a practitioner, be a doctor, and get new patients. All right, let's do some Q&A. So you're welcome to ask about anything, but let's try to focus on all the lab questions first. Kelly, do you have some questions for me?
I do.
Okay, great.
Let's see. The first question that was not lab related, but many people asked, are these slides or PDFs going to be available as hard copy?
I could probably see about sending that out. So let me just make a note and see if I can send that out with the recording. So we'll try to make that happen for you. Sometimes the file gets so big, but I think if I save it as a PDF, I can send it to you.
Okay. So a couple of the lab questions. So as you saw about, she said she's an RD in Texas, not available to order labs for patients. A Rupa rep told her that she would be able to do it this year. Is it possible? Someone else replied and said Rupa recently, she's a CNS, said not yet. She currently utilizes Avexia. And what were your thoughts on that?
Yes, lots of options. I don't know. I don't have an RD in Texas specifically, so I'd have to look it up. Our Texas providers are an MD and a DC, but we do have an RD who can order labs in, I think, 29 states. So an RD is an interesting license because you actually, so sometimes the RDs and the nurses have more flexibility to practice in multiple states. So you want to look that up and check that out. But if you're in a state, and Rupa is one of the best resources for, are you able to order a lab in there? So if Rupa says not yet, I would believe them. But otherwise, you just look within your board in your state, and that's where you find your answer. Or call the lab company directly that you're going to sign up with, and they will know also. But if you're in a situation where you can read labs or educate on labs, or you want to see them and you can't order them, then there are many other options. The one Kelly mentioned is a way to get labs. Direct to patient consumer is a way. Partnering with another provider. We've done that many times. We've had other people do it with our office. So we've had health coaches and nutritionists who weren't part of our office, and they had their own clientele, but they felt they needed a Dutch test or something like that. So they would refer them to our office just for the test, and we would do a shorter history, get their paperwork also. They'd have to sign a release to release the findings and have us communicate. We'd order the labs. We have a couple visits with them, go over the findings, make some recommendations. But otherwise, they're with us for sort of a smaller piece of time, but they're working with that other provider. So that's an option. You could also have a multidisciplinary practice. That's what we do quite a bit. But if you want to just be yourself and not partner with anyone else, patients show up with a lot of labs too. So, and there's also, as much as I love labs, there's a lot you can do. For those of you where you not only can't order labs, but you really aren't licensed to read labs, there's plenty you can do to support, a patient's diet and their lifestyle changes. So many things at a health coach level you can do that makes a very serious difference in a patient's life. So, will you be able to handle that last patient example I showed? Probably not, because those are really in-depth cases. You need some type of medical license to be able to dig deeper. But even with those patients, our health coaches work with them all the time. I love having health coaches in the office. So what it takes for a patient to make lifestyle changes and change their sleeping habits and change their mindset and all of those things, that's coaching. So really important stuff you can do at the coaching level. Wait, you're muted, Kelly.
Thank you. So if you sign up with Rupa Health, can you still do one-on-one consults with individual labs?
Yeah, there's nothing that's stopping you from doing that. So Rupa Health, for those who don't know, they're sort of like a clearinghouse. You know how Emerson Ecologics, you could order many different supplement companies as a practitioner, but that wouldn't stop you from opening a practitioner account with Designs for Health or Apex or something like that. It's the same type of thing. So Rupa Health is a clearinghouse and does a lot of the work for you and makes it quite easy. But if you wanted to also have a separate account with a lab company, I don't know, for a different reason, I'm trying to think of why you would have both. You could, or maybe you want to have a company with another lab that Rupa doesn't carry. It's no problem. So there's no restrictions there.
Can an acupuncturist in California order labs through Rupa?
Yes.
Okay, next thing, do you have experience using the Genova Nutra Eval? There seems to be a lot of information that can be gained from that test for a minimal amount of cost.
Yes, I do. And, most of the micronutrient testing is not my favorite testing. I'll just be honest. I don't order it as often. And I see patients come in with it quite a bit. And some practitioners like to order it right from the beginning. And I just have to be honest, I think that and also like food sensitivity testing done from the very beginning is a waste of money. And the reason I think that is because, and it could just be the patients we see, but we get pretty complex cases and usually there's something bigger underneath it all that we need to uncover and we need to work on it. And then once we do that and we work on it, it would completely change their findings on a food sensitivity test or a micronutrient test. So I don't want to make a patient pay for that twice. Why have them order that in the beginning, do some work, and then we order it again? And it's like, I could have just skipped in the beginning. So hopefully I'm explaining that well. If I had a patient who just said, I don't want to take, any supplement at all without getting a micronutrient panel, I've only once had someone say that, I would absolutely order it for them. So it's not that I think it's bad information, but just when I have that person in front of me and I'm trying to be very respectful of a lab budget, what is the lab that is so worth it that I say, spend your money on this, I need to get the most amount of valuable information from it. And so to me, in most cases, micronutrient and food sensitivity testing is not that first round. We still do a fair amount of food sensitivity testing, but I only like the panel that does all the markers. I don't like IgG panels by themselves.
What about the latest research suggesting that there isn't much benefit in SIBO breath testing?
Until there's some other type of clinical standard that's been used as long and is accessible, it's the best we have. They're not going to go get a jejunum aspirate, that's mostly done in research. It's invasive. It's also limited in the sense that the small intestines is 15 to 22 feet long, and you're only going to get one spot or another. I think the problem with the breath test is that people don't know how to read it and they don't know how to use it. Their thinking is too black and white. They don't know how to tie it back to the clinical picture. So when I look at all the practitioners who use it, the ones I train, everything that's been done out of Cedars-Sinai and Dr. Mark Pimentel's work, I still think it's very reliable. But you have to know how to tie it back in. You can't just look at a lab that gives you a red or yellow box and says positive or negative. I mean, that almost means nothing. So you have to know, was it 2 hours or 3 hours? Was it lactulose or was it glucose? What was the prep diet? How does that tie into their symptoms? Do they have slow motility already? That's going to determine what marker I read this at. So, lot more finesse to it. And then I think it's very valuable information for the price. That being said, a SIBO breath test is still sort of one piece of information. So many times when I would want it, if there's other tests, I'm dealing with limited budget. If there's another test that would give me more information, I might be going there anyway. Just because for the same amount of money, I was getting 70 valuable markers versus 2. I have to think about the amount of information I'm going to get.
Let's see. Would you please explain when is good timing to test saliva hormone test when period is irregular, or if they are on hormone management?
I haven't ordered a saliva hormone test in too long that I would actually look up from the lab what the parameters were for ordering the test. If you asked me about Dutch urine metabolites, I could answer that because I do it all the time. But, I just don't use saliva as much anymore once the Dutch test got better and there were additional markers and additional research. And so I really like the Dutch now. So I do that more often. I'll tell you a free resource that you can get. First of all, you can go to each lab. So each lab, not only do they have consults, which you're probably going to use once or twice, and that's it. You're not going to use that over and over again, but it's helpful if you're just starting. But they should have lab collection instructions and what to do in an unusual situation. So for example, even though we use Dutch all the time, if the patient was on an unusual medication or there was some unusual situation and we weren't sure, we're just going to call the lab. And they're the ones doing it all the time. And they're the ones that have to do all the research and have the science to justify the test, right? And some of these lab companies and supplement companies, I've met their scientific team. It's really quite phenomenal what they do, the good companies. So we would call and ask them. Another resource for that is rupahealth.com. Totally free. You can access it. First of all, you don't have to even sign up with them. You can get their free trainings, like some of the trainings I did and other people, you can get those. But they also have, I can't remember what it's called, but they have their lab instructions that they would send to the patient. So you could say, I want to know the Dutch lab instructions, or I want to know the Genova saliva hormone test panel. What are those instructions? So on Dutch, for example, if you'll see that for a cycling woman with a typical 28-day cycle, these are urine metabolites. She's going to do 4 samples, like 2 the evening and before bed, and then possibly an extra if she wakes up in the night, but otherwise the morning and then 2 hours after she wakes up in the morning. So typically 4 urine samples, and they're mailed in. But it's going to say, well, if she's on that 28-day cycle, she's going to do this between day 19 to 21 or day 19 to 22. What if she has a 30-day cycle or she has a 24-day cycle? Well, they have a lovely little grid for you. You don't have to do the math. If she has a 30-day cycle, then she's going to do it between day 22 and day 25. So, they're trying to time it with ovulation and that progesterone spike. But they have the answers for you right there. So I would go back to the company and ask them.
I know Dutch also recommends doing ovulation testing for irregular periods to see exactly when you're ovulating, and then 5 to 7 days after ovulation for the test.
And the patient can get that, just right at the pharmacy, right? Over the counter, just ovulation sticks.
Other tests to do when patient has high blood pressure but is otherwise healthy and in their mid-30s.
Okay, so, there's many reasons for high blood pressure, and you're trying to find out, is there like a true cardiometabolic reason for it? Is this stress induced? Is this white coat syndrome? What is the mechanism? So many different ways to go about it. Let's say you didn't want to order a lab right away. Someone was on a budget. You could take something like Pharma-GABA and have them take it in a stressful situation when their blood pressure is spiking, and see if they feel any calmer, or if there's any change in their blood pressure. And if there is, it lets you know that there's potentially a stress-induced or an emotional response increase in blood pressure. If there's no change, you might be looking for a different reason. So there's always little examples like that. Having the patient track things. Does their blood pressure spike after a meal? Because if it, like, let's say their spike is only after a meal, then you're going to start going down a different pathway. Now you're going to want to look at the digestive mechanism and what's going on with histamine, right? If their blood pressure is just high all the time, then you're going to want to see what's their lipid panel. Do you want an advanced heart panel and some inflammation markers? Maybe there's plaquing. Have they gained weight? So you have to ask more questions to know. There's not like someone has high blood pressure and I automatically think this is the test. But if they had high blood pressure, everything else seemed fine so far, but they had a family history of diabetes and heart disease, and we wanted to know what was going on in there, that's probably the cheapest test. Would be to they might already come in with a lipid panel, right? It's in annual physical, most docs are going to order a lipid panel, which has very limited helpfulness, to be honest, from a functional medicine perspective. It's going to tell you more about their liver health than their heart health in most cases. So, but you still want to see it. And you want to know what their cholesterol level is, what their LDL is, but then an advanced panel where you can see, their LDL particle size and numbers. Do they have small, dense LDL, LP little a, MPO? These are the types of things. What's their high sensitivity C-reactive protein? Are they dealing with a lot of inflammation? So these are the things you want to start looking into. And we certainly don't want to leave them in a high blood pressure state. And if I had a patient who had continuous high blood pressure, nothing natural was working with it, no one's managing it medically, I would absolutely, refer them to one of our docs who could prescribe, or because I don't prescribe, or their primary care physician or whatever, because it will have to be addressed, hopefully short term, with a prescription, but you don't want to leave someone with high blood pressure. It's too risky. It's not good. The risk for heart attack and stroke down the road, and the damage to the vessels, it's just not something you want to be ignored. Just like a hyperthyroid patient. If you're doing something natural and you don't see a quick change, you don't want to leave someone with a elevated thyroid hormone. It's too much wear and tear on the body. It's very high risk. Same, high iron. There's these things that you have to know, like, okay, it doesn't matter if you're 100% natural. There may be some things where we need medical intervention immediately. And then a goal can be, can the patient do enough work that maybe they don't need to stay on it? Or if they do need to stay on it, how can you co-manage and work with every other aspect in their life to support their health? So there's always plenty to do. Thanks, Doc. Any other questions?
Yes. Let's see. Thoughts on gluten testing that includes testing for celiac, like Cyrex Array 3?
Okay, well, I think it's good to rule out celiac. The blood tests are very inexpensive and quite often not just the gold standard, but something you can count on most of the time. Where gluten gets more complicated is that people don't understand this is not, all or nothing. It's not you're celiac or you're not. Celiac is a smaller percentage. It's not just a gluten allergy. It's an autoimmune condition. The cells are being damaged and changed throughout the gut. So certainly if we have a celiac patient, we need to know, but there's a much bigger funnel of patients. You've got celiac, and then you have non-celiac true gluten allergy. They're having an IgE allergy response to gluten. And then you have, various gluten sensitivities that can show up in a variety of ways. And even someone healthy who has no gluten problems, this protein is not beloved by the gut, and evolution wise, it just hasn't been in our body that long. It can cause some leaky gut even temporarily in a healthy person, but that healthy person has a nice rich microbiome, and the bacteria is able to handle it, and it is a digestive process to eliminate it. Patients who don't have that, the immune system gets involved. And then you start seeing anti-gliadin immunoglobulins being formed. Does that mean they're celiac? Nope. Doesn't even mean they have a true gluten allergy. But we don't want to activate the immune system in response to food. So does it need to be addressed? Yes. So whole spectrum of gluten issues we could have. So if you suspect or need to rule out a true celiac patient, either order the test yourself if you can, very inexpensive blood test, or refer back to their primary care physician or an allergist or a GI, get the test. If it's negative, pretty safe to say they're not celiac. If it's positive, they're going to need a colonoscopy and a biopsy to confirm that they're celiac, and you want to know that. So that would be a good use of that test and a good timing of that test. Is it possible that the blood test could be negative and they do have it and it wasn't picked out? Yes, but it's a much smaller percentage. So then start looking into some of the other ones. Would I jump into Cyrex, some of the more expensive testing to begin with? Nope, not unless it was really dictated. I like that GI map, which I already order for a multitude of reasons, has a anti-gliadin immunoglobulin marker, so I can at least see if they're having an immune response at the gut level. That's helpful. We'll order or refer for the blood tests as needed. Cyrex, really good lab, really pricey for the patients. So I don't use them as often. When I do, it's really specific. One example might be if I have a patient, usually not celiac, but has a true gluten allergy, has been off gluten for years, and yet we got a GI map or some other test, and they had a high gliadin antibody, and it could be from other sources, not wheat, right? But how is this getting into their system? And the patient swears they perfectly clean house, not even the pots and pans, toaster, nothing, right? In that case, maybe I want to get the gluten cross-reactivity testing from Cyrex, because we want to see, is it oats? Is it soy? Is there something else that that antigen and the receptor site, it's binding as if it was gluten? Is there something else we have to eliminate for a while? Or maybe they're overusing some of the newer grains, and their body's just developing a sensitivity because it's too much and it hasn't had enough experience with it. Maybe there's not enough diversity in their diet. So I might do that then, but it's definitely not my first step. And with everything, even the complex patients, I want to do the simplest, most affordable, easiest for everyone, not just for budget, but to make sure we knock all the obvious things off the list, rule out anything important, If there's a referral, give it, or none are needed. Get some palliative care. So, Occam's razor, right? You go with the simplest answer first, or look for horses, not zebras. And then, once the horses have run through and you have to go through zebras, fine. But that's the order I'm thinking of when I do labs.
Okay, 2 more questions. Dr. Pam Smith has opined that BHRT dosing cannot be accurately done with Dutch urine testing. Only saliva tests show true tissue concentrations and should be used to dose hormones. Otherwise, risk overdosing of hormones. What are your thoughts?
That's not the research that I've read. And there was a new research article that came out actually in the last year, validating that urine metabolite testing again. So this specific person, if you send it to me, I'm happy to review it. It might have some new information I haven't seen. I'm certainly open to checking it out. But from what I've read and what I've sort of my clinical evolution, I personally have seen much better results using Dutch than the saliva. Not that the saliva test is bad. I mean, if you like saliva, use it. But I just like the Dutch. It's simpler. I like the additional information, the additional markers, including the markers of metabolism. And I find, hormones have to be so finessed because I describe them like Gmail to the patients, right? These chemical messengers. And while it may take months to stabilize a hormone imbalance, it can be so fast to get a change, right? So it's just, what is the smallest amount to get the change you want? And you're keeping things in balance. It's sort of like juggling, right? Everything you touch moves the other balls on the table. So I find I can finesse that the most and for the patient's comfort with the Dutch. That's been my experience.
Thank you. Okay, last question. She's still on the call as well. If a patient wants to biohack their body to see how to enhance their function, what test would you recommend?
Oh, that's great. So as a lot of these clinics and practitioners, and I even have some that I coach who want to do this, they want to specialize in like anti-aging. So when you say biohacking, that's usually like the patient, they're looking up the biohackers online and the bloggers and all that kind of stuff, which can be fun, although you have to be careful because sometimes they really go down the rabbit hole and they're a little extreme, and we don't actually want patients doing those things. But otherwise, it can be good for the patient learning to have more self-care and awareness, right? Otherwise, most clinics, they don't call it biohacking, although I'm sure you could, but most call it anti-aging, and that's what they focus on. And if you look at the labs that they order, many of them do 1-carbon metabolism, right? Methylation panels, genomics, which we've learned so much, and yet we still know almost nothing, right? So the labs are getting better and better, and the markers are getting better and better. And even like, Kaiser will run genetics now, but they'll tell you, I mean, maybe we know 10%, probably not even 10%. There's still so much to learn. The tests we personally use, and I know there are others out there, we use Genova's methylation panel with genomics, and we use 3x4 genetics tests. I'm trying to think of what other ones we've ordered. I know we've done some like one-off things here and there. Those are probably the 2 we order the most. But yes, when you talk about biohacking, beyond the obvious, like diet and blood sugar balancing and looking at all the hormone levels, right? Maintaining a good weight and physical activity, right? All those basics really should be done first. Then you're getting down into epigenetics, and you're getting down into mitochondrial health and function and what's happening at the cellular level. Lots of mind-body connection, because what is it the patient's thinking, like ACE, right? Adverse childhood experiences. What is their thought process and how they're metabolizing their trauma and their stress, which then impacts their immune function. You can get into some of Dr. Bredesen's work on cognitive health and dementia and Alzheimer's. So if you wanted to like have a biohack clinic, you could maybe divide it into a couple pillars, you know. This is something I teach in depth in FMA 6 is exactly how to do this. But as a practitioner, you have to make your work, you know, systematized and manageable at the same time, individual for each patient. And then you have to make it so the patient understands it and they know what they're going to move through. So I'm just spitballing here, but if I was going to open an anti-aging clinic, let's say I had maybe 3 phases, or I'll call them buckets, and then maybe I'll name it later. Maybe I'll use pillars, maybe I'll use steps, maybe I'll use modules, whatever. So maybe my first bucket would be, you know, all the essentials. Like, how do we first get this person feeling good, you know, moving, utilizing good quality sleep, nutrition, you know, are they doing lymphatic drainage? You know, is there no body odor, no hair loss, you know, these types of things, all the basics. Maybe that's section 1. Then section 2, maybe here we get into 1-carbon metabolism. We start talking about methylation. We start talking, looking at maybe some of the SNPs that patient has and talking about epigenetics and what can we impact versus not. Maybe the vitamins and minerals need to be a little bit more customized, specific to their genetic profile, and we're going down that path. And then maybe the final path, right? Not everyone's going to go all the way through. Some people might not be interested, but those who want to go all the way through, maybe then, like Dr. Hutch, you're going to do telomere length, and you're going to do some of the you know, cancer markers. Maybe you're going to do Cyrex as an autoimmune panel that can see some early markers, 5, sometimes even 10 years earlier. So maybe then you get to your like really fine tuned markers. So that might be one way. Instead of throwing it all to a patient at once, first of all, it'd be way too much. It would cost too much. Not everyone wants to do it, but yeah, that would be sort of my rough idea if I was going to do anti-aging like that. But otherwise, I don't. Telomere length, do I order that with everyone? Rarely. I rarely order it. And I used SpectraCell all the time for years. I don't really use them anymore because they changed a lot of their markers. We use Boston Heart instead. And then some other interesting markers. Usually it's like a unique patient situation or a request. But yeah, if I had that clinic, I'd be doing telomeres, and we already do the 8-hydroxy marker quite often. There's a lot of other, you know, early DNA damage markers you can get. But I don't have a clinic that specializes just in that, right? Some of you might have some cancer clinics or the biohacking clinic, and you might want to do that.
That was all of our questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Zachary.
All right, great. Well, thank you everyone, especially who hung in there all the way to the end with all those questions. We did record it, so if we can send it out tomorrow, we can, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer than that to process. So I would say definitely by the end of the week, we should be able to get it out. And if I can attach that slide deck for you, I'm happy to do it. I did actually put some screenshots already of the slide deck in our Facebook group. So if you haven't joined our open doc group in Facebook, that's a great place to collaborate. Those of you that are already in FMA, I put it in there also. And for those of you that I'm going to see on Saturday, I look forward to spending the day with you. And if you haven't checked out Functional Medicine Academy, feel free to check it out. I think an email is going out soon anyway, but that special FMA 30, it's only 5 days. I think it's a very reasonable price. So if you missed it, I wouldn't worry about it, but you know, who doesn't like to save money? I love a sale. So, and 30% is pretty significant. So anyway, those who want more practice management, some of the courses are on there, grab it, plenty of free stuff too. And clinical lots of clinical information, but we do the real deep dives in FMA. Otherwise, as you can see, hour and a half, we try to give you as much as we can. All right, if we missed any questions, please feel free to email us. We'll do our best to respond. team@thefunctionalmedicineacademy.com. If it's something that's more patient-based, you can reach out to the clinic. Otherwise, almost all of our practitioner communication is through FMA. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great night and a good week. Happy New Year. And I hope you create some good lab systems and feel very comfortable using those labs with your patients. Bye.